Welcome back to the IEA's podcast, Everything Energy. I'm Dan Hewitt. This week, what's next for the global car industry? In modern history, few innovations have been more consequential than the automobile, and for decades, the industry behind it stayed broadly the same. Car sales kept climbing, manufacturing them boosted national GDP, and it was all focused around one technology, the internal combustion engine. But the industry is now undergoing major changes. More people are choosing electric cars, and the geography of car production and sales is shifting. Changes to a $3 trillion market creates both challenges and opportunities for car makers as well as for the countries where they're based. And here to help unpack them are two energy analysts and co-authors of a recent report on this topic, Elizabeth Connolly and Leonardo Paoli. Elizabeth will start with an overview of those big changes, then Leonardo will talk in a bit more detail about the dynamics of manufacturing. All right, Elizabeth Connolly, thank you for joining us. Now, I want to start with just really an overview about how important the global car industry is to the world's economy.
Great. Yeah, I think that's a great place to start. What we see is that the car industry is very important for the kind of major car producing economies. So here I'm referring to China, the European Union, Japan, Korea, and the United States. And so across these major car producers, the car industry is responsible for between 2 and 6% of GDP, when including the economic activity that comes with related sectors that are needed to support car manufacturing. So the car industry is quite important for the economy in car-producing regions, as well as for employment there. So globally, over 10 million people are employed directly in car manufacturing. But employment impacts, again, kind of go beyond just direct car assembly to include also indirect jobs that could be related to components and parts manufacturing. So as an example, if we look at the European Union, the automotive industry has one of the highest ratios of indirect to direct jobs. And so in 2022, there are around 2.4 million direct jobs for car manufacturing in the European Union. And that number increases to over 6 million jobs when we include those in upstream industries, such as those that supply the automotive industry.
Okay, that's the economic side. Now let's think about the energy that the car industry uses and perhaps how that compares with other sectors.
Right. So passenger cars represent kind of the single largest source of oil demand today, accounting for basically a quarter of total global oil demand. And so what we see is that, what happens in car markets, of course, is going to have big implications for oil markets as well. But I think it's also important to realize, too, that the cars are also a kind of big consumer of biofuels and a small today but growing share of electricity demand. So again, what happens with car markets is going to have important implications for energy systems.
Okay, well, that takes us on to the report that you helped write, and it talks about three big shifts within the auto industry. Now, one is a fundamental change in the type of cars that people are buying, which of course is electric vehicles. So could you put into context for us the scale of that shift towards electric vehicles?
Sure. So if we look back at 2017, that's actually when sales of conventional internal combustion engine car sales peaked. And since 2017, the sales of these conventional cars has fallen by 30%. And all of the recovery in car sales since the pandemic has been driven by increased sales in electric and hybrid cars. And so for 2025, we expect 1 in 4 cars sold globally to be electric.
Right. Now, the second shift is about where the cars are being produced. So maybe you could just tell us where the centers of production were historically and where they've been shifting to more recently.
Historically, there have been some traditional car-producing countries such as Japan, Korea, North America, and Europe that have produced the majority of car sales historically. But what we're seeing is that the role China plays has really been increasing in recent years. So from 2010 to 2024, China doubled its car production. And over the past few years, we've seen that car production in these advanced economies that I mentioned, the kind of more traditional car producing economies, in those economies, production of cars has either stalled or in some cases declined. And so now China accounts for about 40% of global car manufacturing capacity, while Europe and North America are at about 15% each.
And just tell us more about what happened in China. How were they able to increase their manufacture, their production of electric vehicles so dramatically?
Sure. So it's been really impressive. I think, China's really taken a comprehensive approach to electric vehicles, with the government setting targets both for EV production and deployment, and really placing kind of an emphasis on the role of EVs in industrial development. And this is ever since kind of the year 2001. And I think there are kind of two main reasons that the Chinese government has placed such a policy focus on the development, again, of both of an electric car industry and market. So the first reason is that China is, and it's by quite some margin, the world's largest importer of oil. And the second thing is that China has tended to rely on international car makers for producing conventional cars that have helped meet the country's growing demand for mobility. So basically, building up a domestic car market and industry was a means for the government to address both of these kind of structural challenges. And I think we can really see what the outcome is today. So while Chinese automakers are responsible for only about a third of the conventional cars sold in the country, with the majority of those conventional cars coming from joint ventures with international car makers, the story is really quite different for electric cars. So more than 80% of the electric cars sold in China are from Chinese electric car makers. And this, again, is really the result of strong industrial policies, including things like low-cost loans to support manufacturing scale-up, as well as the strong and integrated supply chains and the development of advanced battery technologies, which has come from dedicated innovation policy efforts in China.
So that's the supply side. Now let's think about the demand. So could you tell us about the regions where car sales are growing? Where are the parts of the world that are increasingly buying all types of cars today?
Historically, advanced economies with high incomes have tended to have the greatest number of cars per people. So for a while, it's been between 400 to 700 cars for every 1,000 people in many advanced economies. And so when you look back at the year 2000, for example, advanced economies represented 80% of global car sales. But what we've seen over the past 25 years is there's been a big shift here. So as emerging economies in China have had their incomes grow and their demand for mobility grow, their rates of car ownership are also increasing. And so when we look at 2024, China and other emerging economies now account for over half of global car sales.
Okay, final question to you, Elizabeth. So we know there's this huge transition that's underway, but what the report is saying is that there isn't just one solution. There isn't a kind of one-size-fits-all approach to meeting that challenge.
That's exactly right. I mean, I think one of the things we see is that every country is going to follow a different pathway in terms of electric or other vehicle technology adoption. And so car makers really face this challenge of having to develop strategies to navigate technology transitions that are moving at different speeds in different regions. And I think one of our key points is that those strategies should really just focus on playing to their own strengths.
Right, Elizabeth Connolly, thanks so much for talking to me today.
Thank you.
Okay, Leonardo Paoli, thank you for joining us. Now, we can't talk about electric vehicles without focusing on batteries, but I think it's worth starting by just reminding ourselves about how much the cost of car batteries has come down in recent years.
Batteries have declined every single year, except in 2022. And since 2015, they are 75% cheaper than they used to be. Batteries used to be a significant cost barrier for electric cars, and now this is becoming every year less the case.
And I think that leads us on to how important they are for the price point of cars themselves. So how much of what we pay for electric vehicles comes from the price of the battery?
Let me just say 2 words about electric cars versus internal combustion engine ones. The battery is the main piece of equipment of the powertrain of an electric car. The other one is the electric motor. And when you take the overall cost of an EV today, the battery accounts for roughly 25 to 30% of the overall cost. However, this is an additional cost compared to a conventional car, but at the same time, electric vehicles do not require all the complex bits and pieces that make up the engine itself and the transmission. So part of the additional cost of the battery is made up by the lack of a need for an engine.
Right, now let's think about the geography of where they're produced, because we know there's a big picture shift to China in terms of car sales. But now let's think again about batteries specifically. Where are the big manufacturing centers right now?
Batteries are a technology that has been developed mostly in Asia, and China is at the center of the supply chain. The biggest battery making companies are Chinese and have most of their factories in China. However, there are also other companies that are headquartered either in Korea or in Japan that have a very long history of research and development and production for batteries. So when we look at batteries, it's not just China, it's also other Asian countries. However, if we look one step further upstream into the supply chain, and we look at the components, we look at the refining of critical minerals, well, all of that is actually nearly exclusively in China. And to give you just one number, when we look at the production of anodes, which is one component of batteries, 97% of the production capacity is located in China.
And can you talk us through some of the factors that make it comparatively cheap to produce batteries in China compared to other markets in the rest of the world?
Yes, there are many reasons, and understanding this, I think, has been one of the key findings of this report. Let's start with something that was just mentioned, so related to the supply chain. In China, the entire supply chain is co-located. Factories are next to each other, and there is a tightly knit industrial ecosystem. And this, of course, helps to keep prices and costs down. There is also a question related to structural factors such as lower energy and lower labor costs. However, these are factors that are often mentioned, but they account for a relatively smaller share of this cost difference. For us, really, the key finding was understanding that nearly half of the cost difference in production comes from questions related to manufacturing efficiency and automation. This really means just how effectively factories are run. And China has gone very far in terms of reaching high levels of efficiencies and automation. And this really explains a very large share of the cost gap.
Okay, now those are some of the advantages for China. But that isn't to say that manufacturers in other countries can't compete. So how can other countries and regions, how can they close that cost gap?
Yes, estimating costs of production is not a very simple task, but we have set up a model, and we, in a way, simulated a full battery supply chain located in Europe and compared it to one in China. And according to our analysis, it results that producing a full nickel-based battery in Europe would cost 70% more than producing it in China. But this cost gap is not set in stone. This is a technology. It is not a natural resource. And therefore, there are many things that companies and governments can do to change the situation. One thing is related to closing the gap in terms of manufacturing efficiency and automation. This can be achieved by producing more batteries, so in a way with time, but partnering with companies that are currently the best in class is something that could accelerate this process of closing the manufacturing efficiency gap. And governments can also help potentially by working together with other countries to secure the critical mineral supply chain and increase both the security of supply and potentially help going down the cost curve.
And I've got a final question about what people are going to be seeing in their daily lives, seeing on the streets. We know that people are buying more electric vehicles around the world, but that doesn't mean that conventional cars are about to disappear from our lives anytime soon.
That is a very good thought, and there's a few things to keep in mind. First of all, that cars stay on the road for roughly 20 years now. So it means that all the car fleet that exists today is not going to just disappear in a few years. Then when we look at new car sales, we know that much of the growth in the market will come from emerging and developing market economies, and these are regions where today the share of electric cars is still relatively low compared to what we see in other regions. So all of these factors put together make us think that in the future we are most likely going to have a set of different technologies and powertrains being sold in different markets. Different countries will proceed towards electrifications at different speeds. And it is really important what this means for the industry, and that is that they will have to work with different technologies at the same time, different R&D programs, and this, of course, involves a set of complexities, and it is possible that the same, in a way, easy path of the past might not be here in the future.
Okay, Leonardo Paoli, thanks so much for talking to us.
Thank you.